At my husband's birthday dinner, a waitress warned me, "Don't drink that." What happened next shocked me. "Don't drink that." I still hear the words echo in my mind, even now. It was my husband's birthday, and we were sitting in that cozy little restaurant he loved. The one with the checkered tablecloths and soft candlelight that flickered like old memories. I had spent the entire morning preparing, not for the restaurant, of course, but for the smile on his face. His birthday wasn't about gifts or grand gestures, it was about feeling cherished, even in small ways. I had baked him a little cake the night before, wrapped it carefully in parchment paper, and even picked out the perfect dress I hadn't worn in years, the blue one that made him smile when he first saw me in it. The restaurant was bustling, as it always was on a Friday evening, with the soft murmur of conversations floating above the clinking of glasses and silverware. We were seated in our usual corner, near the window, where the light softened the room. I thought everything was perfect. The waitress approached with a gentle smile, carrying a small tray of drinks. One of them was a sparkling cocktail she placed before me. I reached for it, ready to toast to another year with the man I loved. And then I heard it. "Don't drink that," she said, her voice sharp but hushed. I froze. The glass trembled in my hand. My husband looked at me, puzzled. "What do you mean?" he asked. I don't know," I stammered, unsure myself. The waitress's eyes were serious, her brow furrowed. There was urgency in her gaze that made my stomach twist. 5 minutes later, I understood. And those 5 minutes would change everything I thought I knew about that night, about my husband, about myself. And that morning had been ordinary, or so I thought. I woke up early, humming softly as I prepared breakfast. My husband John had already left for work, but he had left a note on the counter. "Happy birthday, my love. Can't wait to celebrate tonight. Jay." I smiled, pouring myself a cup of tea. I had spent the week preparing little surprises, a small bouquet of flowers, a new book he had wanted to read, and of course the cake I had baked myself. It was nothing extravagant, just a way of showing my love in quiet gestures. I remember thinking how lucky I was. After 35 years of marriage, we still had those moments. The soft, ordinary moments that felt extraordinary because they were ours. By evening, I had dressed carefully, and John complimented me on the dress. "You look beautiful," he said, his eyes warm. I felt a flutter in my chest, the kind you feel when you realize that love, even after decades, can still surprise you. We arrived at the restaurant, and the hostess guided us to our corner table. The familiar scent of baked bread and simmering sauce filled the air. I felt my heart swell with happiness. The waitress, a young woman with soft brown hair and a gentle smile, approached. She was polite, professional, but there was something in the way she looked at me, a seriousness that made me pause. She set down our drinks, and I reached for my sparkling cocktail. Then I heard her say it again. "Don't drink that." I froze. My hand hovered above the glass. My husband frowned, concern knitting his brows. "Why not?" he asked, his voice calm but cautious. I'm not sure," she said. Just wait a moment, please." I looked at her, confused, a little embarrassed. 5 minutes later, I would know exactly why she had said those words. During those 5 minutes, my mind raced. I smiled politely, trying to hide my confusion, but my heart was pounding. I watched the other tables, the couples laughing and the children tugging at their parents' sleeves. Everything seemed normal. And yet, beneath it all, there was a quiet tension in my chest, a sense that something unseen was about to shift. I reached for the water glass instead, setting the cocktail aside. That small decision, an instinct really, would be the difference between a night of simple celebration and a night I would never forget. The waitress returned, her hands trembling slightly. She leaned in and whispered, "I saw someone. Put something in your drink. I didn't know if you'd believe me, so I had to warn you." I stared at her, my mouth dry. My husband's eyes widened. "What?" he said, his voice tight. I took a deep breath, my fingers brushing the rim of the untouched cocktail. "Thank you," I said softly. "You saved me." The next moments were surreal. The manager arrived, staff whispered among themselves, and the restaurant seemed to shrink around us. The couple at the next table looked on with concern. My husband held my hand tightly, his eyes filled with both fear and relief. It was one of those moments in life that stops time, where every heartbeat feels louder and every decision carries the weight of everything you love. That night, I realized something profound. Even after decades of living, even after raising children, cooking meals, celebrating birthdays, and loving fully, life could still teach you lessons about vigilance, gratitude, and the quiet heroes who appear in unexpected moments. I looked at the waitress, still standing there, her hands shaking. I smiled. "You were right," I whispered, "and I will never forget it." That night, as we left the restaurant, I held my husband close. We didn't speak much. Words were not needed. The world had reminded us, in a single heartbeat, how fragile life is, and how courage, no matter how small, can change everything. And I knew, deep down, that birthdays, celebrations, and even sparkling cocktails could never truly be ordinary again. The night didn't end at the restaurant door. Even after we got home, the memory of that warning stayed with me, lingering like the soft hum of a lullaby you can't forget. I had sat quietly in our living room, my hands wrapped around a cup of tea, thinking about the waitress, the young woman who had stepped forward when most people might have looked the other way. She didn't know me, she didn't owe me anything, and yet she had acted with courage. It reminded me, in a quiet way, that the world is full of small, hidden dangers, but also small, hidden heroes. Sometimes they arrive as strangers, sometimes as friends, and sometimes they arrive just in time. I glanced over at John, who was sitting beside me, still pale from the shock. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. I nodded, trying to steady my voice. "Yes, thanks to her." He shook his head slowly, running a hand through his hair. "I can't believe it. Someone actually tried to do something to you at your birthday dinner." I took a deep breath and smiled faintly. "I know, but it makes me grateful. For life, for family, for the people who see danger when it hides in plain sight." We sat there for a while in silence. Our children were grown now, living their own lives, and yet the sense of responsibility, the instinct to protect each other, never faded. That night, I thought about all the little moments we had overlooked. The way life sometimes whispers warnings if we only listen. The way intuition, often dismissed as just a feeling, can be a life-saving guide. The next morning, I awoke with a sense of clarity. Something had shifted inside me. Not fear exactly, not panic, but a sharper awareness of life's fragility. I brewed a fresh pot of tea and looked out the kitchen window. The sunlight danced on the garden, highlighting the flowers, the old wooden bench, the swings where our children had played years ago. Life was ordinary, yes, but it was also precious. I thought about the waitress again. I wanted to thank her properly, to tell her what her small act of courage had meant. It was more than just preventing harm. It was a reminder that courage often comes in the quietest form, a whispered warning, a small gesture, an act of vigilance. Later that day, I reflected on the people in our lives who often go unnoticed. Friends who offer quiet support, neighbors who lend a hand, even strangers who act with kindness. I realized that sometimes the people who change our lives don't arrive with grand gestures. They arrive in ordinary moments, doing ordinary things. That turned out to be extraordinary. I remembered my own younger days, when I had acted cautiously around strangers, when I had hesitated to speak up in situations that felt uncertain. Perhaps that caution had saved me once or twice. Perhaps it had kept me from harm, and perhaps now it had led me to listen when someone else spoke a warning I might have otherwise ignored. John and I decided to call the restaurant later that day, just to make sure everything was reported properly. We spoke with the manager, who thanked us repeatedly and assured us that measures would be taken to ensure it never happened again. But I didn't hang up without asking one thing: the name of the young waitress who had warned me. "She's just a new server," the manager said, "but she noticed something most people wouldn't. We'll make sure to commend her." I wrote her a small note afterward, simple but heartfelt. "Thank you. Your courage reminded me that kindness and awareness can save lives. You have a gift. Never forget it." It was a tiny gesture, but it mattered. And in my heart, I hoped it reached her the way her warning had reached me, fully, profoundly, and with life-changing impact. As the day went on, I reflected further on that small, sparkling cocktail that had almost caused harm. I remembered the way the waitress's words cut through the soft murmur of the restaurant, the urgency in her voice, the strength in her hesitation, and I realized something. The hidden danger isn't always obvious. Sometimes it's subtle, sometimes it's quiet, and sometimes it hides in plain sight, disguised as something ordinary: a drink, a glance, a word. Life is full of these hidden dangers, waiting to be noticed by those willing to listen. That evening, when John and I sat down for a quiet dinner at home, I poured us each a glass of wine. But I paused, feeling the weight of the past 24 hours. I raised my glass and looked into his eyes. "To life," I said softly, "to the people who watch over us, and to courage in all its quiet forms." John smiled, squeezing my hand. "To life," he echoed. We drank slowly, savoring not just the taste, but the safety, the warmth, the love surrounding us. I thought of our children, of family, of the people who sometimes step in to protect strangers, and of the world, which is not always safe, but is full of unexpected guardians. And I knew deep down that life had given me a rare gift. Not just the warning that saved me, but the reminder that attention, care, and courage matter more than we often realize. But even as I settled into the calm of that evening, I couldn't shake the feeling that the story wasn't over. Because hidden dangers sometimes reveal deeper truths. Sometimes they bring lessons not just about caution, but about the hearts of the people around us. Those we think we know, and those we are only beginning to understand. And I had a feeling that my birthday dinner was only the beginning of a story I would never forget. The night of my husband's birthday dinner had started with joy, anticipation, and simple plans to celebrate life together. But by the time we left the restaurant, everything had shifted. That sparkling cocktail, the one I had almost touched, held a secret I never expected, and it was about to reveal itself in the most astonishing way. I couldn't sleep that night. Not entirely because of fear, but because a quiet, nagging curiosity had taken hold. Who had tried to harm me? Why? And most importantly, how had the waitress known? The questions circled my mind like moths around a flame. I replayed her warning over and over. "Don't drink that." Her words had carried urgency, yet she had spoken them with a gentleness that made me believe she truly cared. And I knew, deep down, that if she hadn't spoken up, the night might have ended very differently. The next morning, I decided to call the restaurant again, not to revisit the fear, but to understand, to uncover the truth behind that seemingly ordinary drink that had almost caused so much harm. The manager answered quickly. His voice was polite, professional, but I detected a trace of concern. "I wanted to thank you again," I said, "and to ask, can you tell me anything about that drink? What happened?" There was a pause on the line. Then he spoke. "We've investigated. It appears that the drink was tampered with, accidentally, I believe. A bottle in the back had been mislabeled, and the cocktail I served you contained a concentrated ingredient meant for another recipe. Had it been consumed fully, it could have caused serious illness." I felt my chest tighten. Serious illness? My fingers trembled as I held the phone. My mind raced with what-ifs. What if I had taken a sip? What if the warning hadn't reached me? The manager continued, "We're reviewing all procedures, and the waitress who warned you has been commended for her vigilance. Without her quick action, the outcome could have been much worse." I hung up, my hands shaking slightly, and sat back in my chair. I stared at the morning light filtering through the curtains. Somehow, life had spared me. Somehow, a stranger had seen danger before I even knew it existed. Later that day, I shared the details with John. He was quiet for a long moment, his face pale. "Can you imagine?" he said finally. 5 minutes, and our lives could have changed. Forever. I nodded, feeling both gratitude and an almost surreal sense of wonder. Life is fragile, I thought, but it is also full of miracles. Small, silent miracles that arrive just in time, often in the form of ordinary people who notice what others overlook. As the day went on, I reflected on the cocktail. Something that had seemed so ordinary, so celebratory, had carried danger hidden beneath its sparkling surface. And yet, that danger had been averted not by caution alone, but by the care of someone who acted when it mattered most. I remembered the waitress's eyes, earnest, alert, unwavering. There was courage there, yes, but also empathy. She had acted without hesitation, simply because it was the right thing to do. And I realized, as I sat with John later that evening, that the secret behind the drink was more than just a mislabeled ingredient. The secret was the reminder it brought. The world can be unpredictable, fragile, and even dangerous at times, but there is always hope, kindness, and vigilance to counter it. It made me think of all the times I had ignored warnings in my own life. The times I had dismissed intuition as overthinking. The times I had assumed everything would be fine, only to learn later that life had more lessons in store than I could anticipate. This, I realized, was one of those lessons. Quieter, the sun dipping low behind the hills, painting the sky with soft shades of pink and orange. I poured myself a cup of tea and sat by the window, thinking of the waitress again. I wished I could see her one last time, to tell her how much her vigilance had meant. I thought about how ordinary gestures, a warning, a glance, a small act of care, could ripple outward in ways we can never fully measure. And I understood something important. Courage is often quiet. It doesn't always demand recognition. It simply acts when it is needed most. By the time the house grew dark and John fell asleep beside me, I felt a sense of peace mixed with lingering curiosity. Something about the night still called to me, whispering that there was more to discover. Not just about the drink, but about the people who had been around us that evening. Because hidden within that sparkling cocktail, beneath the ordinary surface of our celebration, there was a story waiting to be revealed. A story about people, choices, and the small moments that define the rest of our lives. And I knew, deep in my heart, that the next part of this story would uncover truths I had never expected. Truths that would touch our lives, not just with danger, but with understanding, growth, and an unforgettable lesson about trust and intuition. The next evening, I found myself thinking again about that birthday dinner, the sparkling cocktail, the waitress's warning, and the invisible line between danger and safety. Life has a way of teaching lessons not just in moments of crisis, but in the quiet reflections that follow. John and I decided to have a small follow-up dinner at home, just the two of us. No restaurant lights, no strangers bustling about, only our own kitchen, familiar smells, and the comfort of home. I thought it would help us process the previous night, to let our hearts rest and begin to understand what had happened. I set the table with care, as I always did, but tonight the silverware seemed more significant, not because it was fancy, but because it symbolized the ordinary moments in life, the small gestures that shape the safety, comfort, and trust between us. As we sat down, I poured us each a drink. I was careful, deliberate, choosing a familiar wine, making sure there was no possibility of error. Yet my thoughts kept wandering back to that moment at the restaurant. The way the waitress had watched me, the urgency in her voice, the invisible danger I had narrowly avoided. "Do you ever think about it?" John asked quietly, lifting his glass. "The drink, the warning, everything?" I nodded. All the time. It was more than just a warning about a cocktail. It was a reminder that we don't always see what's coming, but someone else often does, and sometimes that someone is willing to act when we might not. He reached across the table and held my hand. "I'm grateful she did. I don't know what I would have done if—" He didn't finish the sentence. I understood perfectly. The thought alone was chilling. We ate slowly, savoring each bite, but the air between us was filled with unspoken questions. And then it happened. A small, almost imperceptible sound that drew my attention. A soft knock on the door. I glanced at John. "Who could that be?" I whispered. He shrugged, equally puzzled. I stood and opened the door, and there she was, the waitress, holding a small envelope in her hands, her eyes wide but gentle. "I wanted to make sure you received this," she said softly. I took the envelope, my fingers brushing hers. Something about that brief contact made my heart swell. Inside was a note, carefully written. "I'm glad you listened. There's something you need to know about what happened at your birthday dinner. Please call me." My pulse quickened. A hidden truth? After all we had learned, could there really be more? I dialed the number she had left. The conversation was quiet at first, hesitant, but then she shared the details. The cocktail, it turned out, had been tampered with, not maliciously, but by mistake. A mislabeled bottle in the back of the restaurant, a mix-up that could have ended tragically. She had noticed the error as she walked by the bar, realized the potential danger, and decided to intervene. But there was more. She spoke of the subtle ways people sometimes take advantage of ordinary moments, how small errors, overlooked details, or assumed trust can create hidden threats. She reminded me that vigilance, care, and the courage to speak up were not just acts of protection, but acts of love. Sitting back at the table, I felt a strange mixture of relief and reflection. Life had spared me, yes, but it had also revealed something deeper. The hidden truths at the table, in the ordinary moments, are often more profound than the obvious dangers. John reached for my hand again. "We almost never notice the little things that matter the most," he said. "And yet, those little things, they change everything." I nodded. Yes, the hidden truth isn't always visible at first. Sometimes it takes a stranger's courage, a whisper of warning, or a careful observation to bring it to light. And when it does, it changes everything. We sat there in silence, letting the words sink in. The house felt warmer, softer, as if the walls themselves were echoing the lessons we had learned. That night, as I cleared the table, I thought about life in all its quiet complexity. The hidden dangers, the unseen heroes, the moments that seem ordinary but are really extraordinary. I realized that our lives are full of tables like that birthday dinner, moments that appear simple but hold secrets, lessons and truths waiting to be uncovered. And the greatest lesson of all? That courage, care, and vigilance can arrive in unexpected forms. Sometimes as a stranger, sometimes as a small act, sometimes as a warning whispered at just the right moment. We closed the evening feeling grateful, not just for life, but for the people who remind us to pay attention, to notice, to act, to love. And deep inside, I knew that the story was almost at its end, but the final revelation, the moment of understanding, of peace, was yet to come. On the morning after that quiet dinner, I woke with a sense of peace I hadn't felt in days. The events of the birthday dinner, the waitress's urgent warning, and the hidden danger all felt like a storm that had passed, leaving only calm in its wake. I brewed a pot of tea, my hands steady, and watched the sunlight spill across the kitchen table. For a long moment, I simply sat there, thinking about all that had happened, how fragile life could be, how a single decision, a small act of courage, could change everything. John came in quietly, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He placed one beside me, his eyes soft with relief. "I've been thinking," he said, "about how lucky we were, and not just because the drink didn't reach you, but because someone cared enough to speak up." I smiled, feeling warmth spread through my chest. Yes, it's strange, isn't it? How life can teach you lessons through ordinary people doing extraordinary things. We drank in silence, savoring the calm after the storm. And yet, beneath that calm, I felt a quiet understanding settling in. A realization that the real story wasn't just about danger or cocktails or even birthdays. It was about awareness, courage, and the way small acts of kindness ripple through our lives. Later that day, I decided to visit the restaurant one last time. I wanted to thank the waitress properly, to tell her how much her quick thinking had meant to me. When I arrived, I found her quietly wiping down tables. Her face lit up when she saw me. "I just wanted to say thank you," I said, "for warning me, for acting when it mattered. You saved me." She blushed, shaking her head. "I just did what anyone should do. I'm glad it helped." I reached out and squeezed her hand. "It helped more than you'll ever know. You reminded me that courage can arrive in the quietest of moments, and that ordinary people can change lives without realizing it." She smiled, and in that smile, I saw a reflection of hope. Hope that people still notice, still care, still act with compassion when it matters most. That evening, I returned home. John was reading in his chair, the soft glow of the lamp surrounding him. I set my bag down, took a deep breath, and looked around our home. The house felt different somehow. Not in shape or size, not in decoration, but in spirit. The tension, the worry, the fear that had lingered since the birthday dinner had lifted. I realized then that I had closed more than a physical door that day. I had closed the door on fear, on doubt, on the sense of helplessness that life sometimes brings. I had opened the door to gratitude, reflection, and understanding. As sitting at the kitchen table, I poured myself a cup of tea and thought about the hidden dangers we face every day. The moments we overlook, the signs we ignore, the whispers we dismiss. And I realized that life isn't just about surviving those moments. It's about noticing, appreciating, and acting with courage, whether in grand gestures or small, quiet ways. I looked at John, who had set down his book and was watching me with quiet curiosity. "I feel lighter," I said softly. "After all that happened, I feel like I can finally breathe again." He smiled, reaching across the table to hold my hand. "We were lucky," he said simply. "Lucky you were careful. Lucky someone cared. Lucky we have each other." And I nodded, letting the words sink in. Life was fragile, yes, but it was also full of unexpected blessings, moments of courage, and reminders of the love that surrounds us. Later, as I prepared for bed, I thought about the waitress one final time. A stranger, a guardian in disguise, someone who had stepped into our lives at the perfect moment. I whispered softly, "Thank you." And then I closed the door to the day behind me. Not just the physical door, but the door to fear, uncertainty, and what-ifs. I stepped into the quiet night, into the gentle rhythm of home, and finally allowed myself to rest. Because sometimes the most important doors we close are the ones we carry inside. And the ones we open to gratitude, love, and courage are the ones that truly change our lives. As we wrap up tonight's story, I hope it reminded you of the quiet courage and love that surrounds us every day. If this story touched your heart, consider subscribing so we can share more gentle, heartfelt tales together. And don't forget to leave a little like to let me know you enjoyed our time together.